haven't even said anything yet. And Terry, thank you for your introduction. You know, recently at another event, the person introducing me said that last year, because of that emergency landing on the Hudson, where we hit geese and both engines failed, that I had suddenly been thrust into the spotlight. So, of course, when I took the podium, I thanked her for her wonderful introduction, but then corrected her and said, actually, it was a lack of thrust that caused me to be here. And maybe I do need an introduction. You know, today, you may think that you know who I am, but you might not. You see, today I'm not the public face of an event that's captured people's imagination around the world, but since I'm the father of two Doherty High School students, I'm here as Kate and Kelly's dad. And what an amazing 20 months it has been. Talking about making your head spin. Imagine going from complete anonymity, and at that point I'd lived my life anonymously for almost 58 years, and literally in an instant, for everyone on that airplane and our families, we experienced a life-changing event. It changed our lives instantly, completely, forever. In fact, it was very difficult. It was overwhelming. We were in shock. And it affected each of us a little bit differently. You know, I think the highlight of last year for my older daughter was meeting the president. For my younger one, it was meeting the Jonas Brothers. And for many months, if they could have blinked and made it gone away, I think they would have. But it's also been the source of wonderful opportunities. In fact, my first officer, Jeff Skiles, and I, that day, when we first became aware that this story was going to be a big one and was going to last a long time, unlike most other stories that tend to fade, we felt an intense obligation to do as much good as we could in every way that we could for as long as we could while we had this attention focused on us. And what a wonderful way to try yet to make another difference than this one. I can't tell you, unless you've experienced it, how intense, how traumatic that day was and the immediate aftermath. When we lost thrust on those engines, it felt as if the bottom had fallen out of our world. It felt as if the forward momentum of the airplane nearly had stopped. Even as it was happening, in the first seconds, I could feel my body's normal physiological response to the life-threatening stress. I could feel my blood pressure and my pulse spike. I sensed my visual field narrow, and yet I had the discipline to focus, to apply what I'd learned and make appropriate choices. But even though everyone survived, for the next year and a half, there were people whose job it was to scrutinize every syllable I had uttered in that 3 minutes, 28 seconds, every thought I'd had, every action I'd taken, and we survived that scrutiny. But imagine if even one person had not survived. I personally couldn't have celebrated any of this. It would completely have changed the entire character of this event and the aftermath. Now imagine if you were the driver of an automobile and you caused someone else's death. Let me tell you from my own personal experience, you wouldn't be able to sleep for many nights. The what-ifing, the second-guessing, especially at 3 o'clock in the morning, would be unbearable. For many months, perhaps years, it would be the first thing you would think of every morning when you awoke, and it would be the last thing you would think of every night before you went to sleep. Imagine if you were faced with criminal charges. It might take a year or two for them to wind their way through the court system. Imagine if you were faced with a civil suit for wrongful death. That would be something you would have to live with every day for the rest of your lives. 41,000. That's the number of people who die annually on our nation's streets, roads, and highways. Let me put that number in perspective for you. That's 70% of the 58,000 Americans who died in the 10 years of the Vietnam War. That's an average of 112 per day. Let me put it to you in very personal terms. If that were to happen in aviation, that's the equivalent of an airliner crashing every day with no survivors. Let me tell you what would happen if that happened in aviation instead of on our streets. After about 3 days of that kind of carnage, the system would come to a grinding halt. The president would declare a national state of emergency. Airplanes would be grounded. Airports would be closed. Airline companies would begin to fail. Congressional hearings would take place, federal investigations to get to the root of the problem. We simply wouldn't put up with that kind of death toll. And yet, on our streets and highways, we do. Why? Now, granted, in aviation, accidents are rare. That tends alone to make them noteworthy and newsworthy. They also involve more than a few people at a time. Because traffic accidents involve usually only a few at a time, we've gotten used to them. We treat them as an everyday occurrence, a cost of doing business. And our attitudes toward driving are equally lax. One of the reasons that professional aviation is so safe is that it's just that, professional, in the attitudes and the behaviors with which we approach the job, and the seriousness with which we accurately perceive the risks. We in aviation have stopped thinking of airline deaths as inevitable, and instead, we have begun to think of them as inexcusable. You know, faced with such an enormous and complex challenge, it's easy to give up. We may think, what can each of us individually do to possibly cut that number? But you know what? We hold the key. Through our attitudes and our behaviors, we collectively decide every year how many people are going to die. So I ask you, how many deaths can you tolerate? How many can you live with? How much is enough? So my call to action to you is approach driving with the seriousness it deserves. Because what you're really doing every time you get in a car is controlling, guiding a 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 pound missile along the highways. And each time you allow yourselves not to be disciplined and not to focus, instead to be distracted for even a few seconds, it's tantamount to driving with a blindfold for the length of a football field at highway speeds. You wouldn't do that, neither would I. So why tolerate the equivalent? Each of us has a chance to make a difference. Let's start today. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Sullenberger. That was terrific. And it just, for me, it hit home in a lot of different ways. How many people ever thought of it from that perspective? That when I'm behind the wheel and I've got other people in the car, I'm like a pilot. I'm taking these people's lives in my hands. Have you ever thought of it from that perspective? Because I haven't. I think if we all can start to think of it from that perspective, whether it's a child's car seat in the back of your car, whether it's 3 of your buddies that you're going to the football game with, it doesn't matter. You've got other lives that are relying on you to get them to a destination safely. And we have laws that are now in place to protect us, to help us from doing things like carpooling when you just have your receive your license. But we have to take it into our own hands, and that's students, young adults, and adults alike. So as much as we can, apply the quote that Sully just provided to us, and that is to have the discipline to apply what you learned and to make the right choices. Are we going to do that? Okay. One more hand, please. Round of applause for Captain Sullenberger. Thank you. We will be raffling off signed copies of Captain Sullenberger's book. It's called Highest Duty, My Search of What Really Matters. And we're going to raffle that off, copies of that book, to Doherty Valley High School students who participate in the It Happens program. We're excited to be kicking off the Street Smarts program. Street Smarts is committed to positively changing bicyclist, pedestrian, and driver behavior. We encourage you to visit our website. The website is street-smarts.com. That's street-smarts.com. There's a wealth of information about the program and other traffic safety resources for teens, drivers, parents, cyclists, others. All of our programs would not be possible without the generous support of our program sponsors. So once again, please, a round of applause for State Farm Insurance, AT&T, as well as our former sponsor, Sunset Development Company. A signed copy of Captain Sullenberger's book and a small thank you gift bag will be given to each of our program sponsors at the end of this event. Once again, Travis Bell, thank you for your support of the program. All the leadership kids who have been involved, thank you all very much. We're very excited you could attend. Remember, go back to class, be street smart. Thanks everybody for coming today. Enjoy the rest of your day. We are here at Doherty Valley High School in San Ramon, where we just had a press conference to announce the kickoff to the It Happens campaign, which is part of our Street Smarts Drive Safely, pedestrian safety, bicyclist safety program. And what we're trying to do is to convey the messages that we heard this afternoon. And the person who conveyed those messages so poignantly is with us here right now, and it's our very own hometown hero. It's Captain Sullenberger. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. It's great to be with you.
You know, the thing that really stuck out for me during your presentation, you said that during those 3 minutes or so before you landed in the Hudson River, that you had the discipline to apply the things that you learned in order to make appropriate changes, or make appropriate choices, rather. And, I mean, that could apply in so many areas of life, but certainly when it comes to getting behind the wheel.
And for young drivers, it certainly applies to them. And not only is the discipline required, but it requires integrity and, quite frankly, sometimes courage to do what's not convenient or not cool, but to do what's right. And what my message is that none of us has the right to put someone else at risk for our own convenience.
And I would think that would apply to the passengers as well, to make the right choices. Know who you're getting in the car with. Know who that person who's driving. Has that person just got their license? Are they under the influence? Are they subject to, distracted driving? Those kinds of things. And as a parent of 2 high school daughters, I'm sure that's something that you probably reinforce every day.
And I encourage everybody to have a conversation about these important issues with their children. And more important, to model appropriate behavior for their children to follow, because they're much more likely to do as we do and not as we say.
And so for the adults who are watching this, and maybe even those who don't have kids, what kinds of things in your mind can adults do to model appropriate behavior, whether you're behind the wheel or not?
Well, certainly don't drive impaired, and avoid distraction. And again, that's a matter of discipline, a matter of choice, choosing not to use the phone while you're driving, even if you have a hands-free headset, because it's the mental disengagement of talking to someone not in the car that takes away some of our ability to drive as well. Not to text, not to try to read emails, not to try to eat or put on makeup. When you're driving, you should be driving. Right.
Well, and when we were first getting our driver's licenses, when I was 16, 17, 18 years old, these kinds of things didn't exist. Cell phones didn't exist. The ability to text message didn't exist. But it's part of their world. It's like an attachment to their hand now. I don't know how. Do you? How do we get kids from distracted driving, especially when it comes to the telephone or text messaging?
We have to give them real world, concrete examples of why it matters. One of the analogies I use is if you're traveling at highway speeds and you're distracted, you look away for even 3 or 4 seconds, you're talking about covering the length of a football field, essentially blind. Now, we wouldn't blindfold ourselves and drive the length of a football field on a crowded freeway, but if we allow ourselves to look away and try to read a text or an email, that's essentially what we're doing. We're in command of a 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 pound missile, and we owe it to others not to put them at risk for our own convenience.
Well, thank you again for being here. This was a treat for these students who were gathered here, as well as the adults, I can say, and your message was just absolutely spot on. So we appreciate the fact that you're part of our community and that you're willing to give back. Heck, he granted the first local interview to one of our very own Doherty Valley High School students. So thanks for your support of this school, for our school district, and for this community in general.
My pleasure.
Captain Sullenberger joins us.